Okay, imagine this. The really gritty, flash-lit world of, say, 1930s, 40s New York crime scenes, dark alleys.
Yeah, intense stuff.
And then picture the complete opposite. The dazzling, almost manufactured glamour of a rising Hollywood superstar.
Big contrast.
Exactly. Today, we're going to take a deep dive into how these two, well, seemingly totally different worlds actually came together through the lens of one of photography's most fascinating figures,
Right. You've asked us to unpack the claims around this photographer, Arthur Felig,
better known as Ouija.
better known as Ouija, yeah. The self-proclaimed king of the streets, and his surprising but actually pretty significant interactions with, well, the queen of glamour, Marilyn Monroe.
So our mission here is to really pull out the most important nuggets of knowledge from the sources you've given us, give you a shortcut, basically, to being well-informed on this really unique slice of cultural history.
We'll take a journey, starting in those dark alleys with Ouija's early crime photos, and follow him into his later, more satirical celebrity portraits.
And along the way, we'll see how Marilyn Monroe fits into that whole artistic journey.
Exactly. Which led to some truly unforgettable images and some really fascinating insights into fame itself, what it even means.
Okay, let's really get into this. Arthur Felig, the man who became Ouija. He first made his name back in the 30s and 40s in New York.
Right.
He was a freelance news photographer, kind of famous for prowling the city streets at night. He even had a police radio in his car.
Yeah, that was his thing, so he could get there fast.
Right, capturing these raw images, crime scenes, fires, car crashes, just general mayhem with that signature black and white flash.
Yeah.
Very stark.
And those photos, his dramatic shots of, blood-splattered mobsters or grieving onlookers, they didn't just look like film noir. They basically predated it. They evoked the look years before Hollywood really latched onto it. Critics consistently call those gritty news photos proto-noir, like stills from those dark, moody films, but before the genre really existed.
And it wasn't just a resemblance, right? It was more direct.
Oh yeah, definitely direct influence.
Yeah.
There's the example of producer Mark Kellinger. He was so impressed, he actually bought the rights to Ouija's book title, Naked City, from 1945.
Okay.
And then he based the whole visual tone of his 1948 film, The Naked City, directly on Ouija's style.
So the look of the film came from the photos?
Pretty much. That film's stark lighting, the deep shadows, that unflinching urban realism, it clearly anticipates what we now think of as noir cinematography.
Interesting. So putting this in context, it might be a bit much to say Ouija invented film noir.
Right, it's an overstatement. Noir drew from lots of places, like German expressionist lighting, those hard-boiled crime novels.
Sure.
But his photographs absolutely had a formative influence on how Hollywood showed the urban underworld.
Yeah.
There's that famous quote, Ouija made the night noir with his camera.
Yeah.
He helped define that visual language Hollywood later picked up.
So the claim that Ouija inspired film noir is actually pretty accurate then, widely acknowledged.
Oh, absolutely. Art critics, Hollywood historians, they generally agree on his impact. Hollywood even hired him sometimes.
Yeah.
Like, he was a consultant on Stanley Kubrick's Dr. Strangelove. And apparently Peter Sellers based Dr. Strangelove's weird accent on Ouija's own voice.
No way. Okay, so you mentioned his influence on film noir, which pulls from German expressionism, hard-boiled fiction. How was Ouija's contribution distinct? Was it more about the visual style itself rather than, say, the story?
That's a really good point. German expressionism, yeah, it gave us those dramatic shadows, the skewed angles. But Ouija brought this unvarnished realism straight from the street.
Okay.
He wasn't just lighting a controlled studio set. He was capturing the raw, often messy truth of the city at night. His impact was less about a polished narrative and more about the authentic, sometimes brutal visual texture of the urban environment.
So he showed Hollywood what the real underbelly looked like.
Exactly. And then they stylized that reality.
So going from that gritty crime stuff to Hollywood stars, that feels like a huge jump. What prompted that shift in his focus?
Well, after World War II, you definitely see a significant change in Ouija. He moved beyond the murders and mayhem.
Right.
I mean, he was already getting some recognition in the art world. MoMA showed his work back in 1943.
Wow, MoMA.
Yeah. And he was getting commissions from big magazines like Life and Vogue. Plus, his photo books like Naked City and Ouija's People were bestsellers. And they weren't just crime scenes. They showed all sorts of offbeat New York characters.
So he was broadening his scope already.
Totally. His core philosophy was always, names make news and spectacle sells. He just started applying that to a wider range of human interest stuff. Crowds at Coney Island, odd or marginal characters. the kind of subjects Diane Arbus later became famous for.
And then came the big move. 1947, he heads to Hollywood.
Yep, packed his bags. He actually said he was tired of murders and crime scenes, needed a change.
So Hollywood, how did he approach that scene?
He really reinvented himself there, became an observer, but also a satirist of fame. He kind of traded that direct documentary style for images that were more manipulated, often taking hours in the dark room. He'd photograph movie premieres, celebrity parties, sure, but always with this ironic or, frankly, unflattering twist. Catching celebrities from behind or in awkward situations, deliberately undermining the glamour.
That's quite a pivot artistically.
Yep.
Especially for someone known for raw realism. Was Hollywood okay with that? Or was he seen as this outsider causing trouble?
Oh, he was definitely still an outsider. And maybe that was part of his edge, Gave him that unique perspective. Yeah. He wasn't aiming to be a studio photographer.
Right.
He even famously created this trick elastic lens, basically a warped or prismatic lens, to literally distort photos of famous faces. Twisted them into these grotesque caricatures. He called them photo caricatures or distortions. And it wasn't just a party trick. It was his commentary. His visual argument that celebrity, even at its most dazzling, is often just a warped reflection of reality, a construct he wanted to pick apart.
So fame itself as a spectacle, a distortion. And he physically warped the images to make that point. That's clever.
It really is. And even after he moved back to New York in 1952, he didn't go back to the crime beat. He kept doing these surreal distortions of public figures, JFK, and yes, Marilyn Monroe.
Marilyn again.
Yeah, he'd take her famous face and warp it into these funhouse mirror versions, grotesquely distorted but still instantly recognizable, like the Marilyn Monroe distortion from around 1960, which is in the Cleveland Museum of Art now.
It's striking how that theme of spectacle runs through all his work, from crime to celebrity. How did he apply that same blunt eye you mentioned to Hollywood's manufactured glitz?
He saw Hollywood glamour as just another form of public spectacle, like a five-alarm fire or a crowd at Coney Island. It wasn't something to just capture beautifully.
Right.
His lens kind of cut through the PR gloss. He was looking for the inherent strangeness, the performance aspect, maybe even the vulnerability in these famous people. Flattery wasn't the goal. It was almost like a journalistic dissection of fame itself.
Which brings us perfectly to Marilyn Monroe. Their paths crossed right in this key period for Weegee.
Exactly. Right when he was transitioning. He'd made his name with the tabloid crime stuff, but was just starting to dip his toes into the showbiz world. That's when a young Marilyn steps in front of his camera.
This was July 1949. Monroe was, 23? An aspiring starlet doing publicity for a Marx Brothers film, Love Happy.
That's right.
And this wasn't paparazzi snapping her on the street. It was a proper arranged photo shoot.
Yeah.
Jones Beach Swimming Pool, Long Island.
Yep. She posed in an emerald green bathing suit, doing a kind of pin-up style session to get some press.
So why Weegee? I mean, why would she or her publicist pick the infamous crime photographer for a bathing suit shoot?
Well, by 49, Weegee was already a bit of a celebrity himself. He even stamped his photos. Credit photo by Weegee the Famous. So his reputation for sensational, attention-grabbing pictures probably appealed to Monroe's team. She needed media exposure, any way she could get it. And a quirky shoot by this notorious photographer-turned-personality, that could generate some serious buzz.
Makes sense. Mutually beneficial.
Totally. Monroe got press from a photographer people were talking about, and Weegee got to diversify his portfolio with a glamorous subject.
It really shows him branching out, moving from crime into pop culture, but approaching Marilyn with that same blunt eye, direct, flashy, maybe a bit cheeky.
Exactly. He wasn't trying to be a glamour photographer. He just knew names make news, and Marilyn in a swimsuit. That was definitely news.
Okay, so that was 49. But their paths crossed again later, right?
They did. Fast forward to the mid-1950s. By then, Marilyn Monroe was a massive star, exploded onto the scene, and Weegee had moved back to New York.
So did they have like a working relationship?
Not really a formal one. It was more professional and often just coincidental. Weegee, now this freelance photographer and minor celeb himself, would just show up with the rest of the press pack at events where Monroe was appearing.
And he caught some amazing moments at September 9th, 1954, Idlewild Airport. That's JFK now, right?
Right, JFK Airport. He snapped that really famous shot of Monroe blowing a kiss to her fans.
Oh, I know that one.
Yeah, it perfectly captures that mix of glamour and total chaos around her public appearances. And interestingly, Weegee later took that exact photo and manipulated it into one of his distorted versions for an exhibition. Shows he was still playing with the image.
Wow. Okay, what else?
Just a week later, September 15th, 1954, Weegee was there with all the other photographers for the iconic 7-Year Itch subway skirt scene.
The white dress moment.
The white dress moment. That was Monroe's own huge spectacle,
Yeah.
The city street literally turned into a movie set, and Weegee was there, witnessing the creation of that image.
It really does bring his two worlds together. This street photographer watching this manufactured celebrity event.
Perfectly. Then, March 1955, the East of Eden premiere, Weegee photographed her on the red carpet. And one specific photo from that night became the basis for another darkroom caricature in his Distortions series. He was actively experimenting.
He kept coming back to her image.
He did. But maybe the most unusual encounter was March 31st, 1955. There was a charity circus event at Madison Square Garden.
Okay.
Marilyn rode a pink elephant. Now, lots of photographers got those posed, iconic shots. But Weegee, he captured this candid, almost kind of ungainly shot of her clambering onto the elephant's back.
Not the glamorous pose.
Not at all. It's pure Weegee. Finding that unguarded human moment, even amidst all the absurdity and glamour, it's actually a really rare print, possibly unpublished, really highlights his unique eye.
It's like he was the original anti-paparazzi, wasn't he? Always looking for the awkward bit, the real moment, while everyone else wanted the perfect shot. You can almost picture him smirking.
Totally. And then even when she wasn't physically there, he kept engaging with her image through those distortion prints in the late 50s.
Right, turning her beauty into caricature.
Exactly. Deliberately grotesque, yet still undeniably Marilyn. It was his way of deconstructing the whole Marilyn myth.
So through all this, their relationship stayed purely professional. No personal connection.
Seems entirely professional, yeah. Weegee wasn't after polished studio portraits. He was interested in Marilyn as public spectacle. The whole phenomena, the interaction between her and the crowd. He even photographed the crowds looking at her.
The spectacle itself.
Right. Marilyn Monroe just embodied that nexus of spectacle and reality that was Weegee's core subject, really. She was right in his wheelhouse.
So given how iconic they both are, Weegee and Marilyn, you'd think he must have taken tons of photos of her. What's the actual count? How many are there?
Yeah, you'd think so, but the reality is quite different. The actual number of distinct Monroe photos by Weegee is pretty small.
Really?
Yeah, only a handful of images, maybe fewer than 10 distinct poses of Marilyn have actually surfaced publicly.
Wow, that few.
Which is why they're considered rare and pretty highly coveted now.
Yeah.
You see them in auctions sometimes, like a set of 4 Weegee photos of her, including 3 distortions, sold for about $10,000. A single print from that 1949 Jones Beach shoot went for over $3,000.
So scarcity definitely adds to the value.
No doubt. Their professional connection, it was brief, but historically it's really intriguing. You've got the Queen of Glamour meeting the King of the Streets.
And the results are?
Well, the resulting images are sometimes charming, sometimes chaotic, sometimes subversively funny.
A real mix.
Definitely. Weegee's photos of her, even though there aren't many, they form this really fascinating footnote in both of their legends. They add a unique chapter to Marilyn's visual history, one that kind of strips away the Hollywood polish with a wink and a flashbulb.
So we've covered a lot of ground here. We've really unpacked how Weegee, this legendary king of the streets, this proto-noir photographer, kind of morphed into a satirist of fame.
Right. And how in doing that, he ended up capturing the Queen of Glamour, Marilyn Monroe, at these really key moments. First as she was rising, and then when her career just exploded.
Well, Weegee's lens caught, it wasn't just pictures, was it? It feels more like a commentary.
Oh, definitely. A commentary on what people were starting to call the society of the spectacle, even before that term really took off. He showed us the raw reality simmering just beneath the polished surface. Didn't matter if it was a crime scene or a celebrity pose.
It really makes you think, doesn't it? About the nature of what we see, especially with public figures. How much is real? How much is constructed?
Exactly. And maybe that leads us to a final thought for you, the listener.
Yeah, think about this. We live in an era now that's just saturated with images. Digital manipulation is incredibly sophisticated. So what unseen, unguarded moments or even deliberate distortions are being captured today? Things that might one day completely reshape how we understand a public figure or a whole cultural moment. Weegee back then was already bending reality with his lens and his darkroom tricks. How might our own ideas about authenticity and spectacle keep evolving in this new digital age?
It's a fascinating question. Something to think about.